For the people who are just meeting you for the first time, what do they need to know about you? Who is Dana beyond your website or your socials or anything they see out there? Who really are you and what do you want people to know about you?
I have 20 years of experience in education. I ended up in education and felt like, you know what? I think that this is a calling. I love it. I ended up getting a doctorate in education. I'm originally from Illinois. I worked for about 8 years in Korea, which is where I got my start in education. And then I have been here now in Texas for about 10 and a half years. I'm pretty solidly a member of the Texas community now. I live just north of Houston in Conroe. We'll talk a little bit about the state board District 8. It's a very wonky district going from Fort Bend County all the way down or around Houston to Galveston, not quite Galveston, but Baytown area. So I'm a lifelong educator. It's something I'm really passionate about. I thought it was interesting in your first video about the position. You mentioned that you don't have to be a parent to be really involved. I like to mention to people, I'm not a parent. I'm married. I have a wife. Her name is Mariana, but I'm not a parent. However, I have in any given semester 200 to 260 students. The way that I see it is it's a different kind of parenting. It's certainly not parenting in the traditional sense, but I've already had a student in my office today in tears, and I feel like I've got hundreds of children in some ways. I'm very invested in education in our community, not just because it's my job, but also because I get to see and talk to these students every day. And I hear about the schools they came from, I hear about what their career goals are. And it's just something that I really enjoy. I stay in touch with a lot of my students. Students is actually helping with the campaign because she sought me out. And so that's who I am in a nutshell.
Mhm.
Married, cats. I love traveling.
What moment or experience made you say, I'm actually going to run for this office? You have the experience, obviously, there's that, but what was that driving force that was like, I'm signing up for this right now? Because had you ever thought about running for office before, or had you run before? Why now? Why this?
That's a great question. I actually have a bachelor's and a master's in political science, and I teach politics. But if you had asked me 2 or 3 years ago, do you think you would have run for office? I would have said, absolutely not. I'm much more of a behind the scenes kind of person. It's just not my style. However, I had been thinking about something the past few years, probably since 2020, 2021, and it really hit home for me this past election cycle, which is that I went to my polling place and there were so many positions with Republicans running uncontested. And so we can't even get Democrats on the ballot. And everyone, I live in Montgomery County. A lot of people say, oh, Montgomery County is so red, so Republican, so conservative. And I'm like, yes, but also
That
I live.
doesn't mean
And if I live there, I know for a fact there are people who like me who also live there. And so, really, my motivating factor initially was just like, let's get more Democrats on the ballot. And if I have to be one of them, then so be it. I started exploring the races coming up in 2026 and what would I actually be a good fit for. And I had thought in the past about running for school board, something that would utilize my experience in education. And I started looking more into the State Board of Education. And I'm like, you know what? This is actually perfectly aligned with my experience, with my passion, with my interests. And as it happens, there's a Republican incumbent in that position who's been there for 12 years. The position's been uncontested in every election I could find. To my knowledge, I'm the first Democrat running for this position in District 8. But also, District 8 is such a quickly changing district that it doesn't make sense that we have Republicans going unchallenged. What kicked it off for me, I've been getting increasingly angry about the state of education in Texas. Some of the major changes that we saw early last year, including the mandatory posting of the Ten Commandments in classrooms, the religious ideology in our curriculum. I'm very much a curriculum specialist. I love developing, evaluating, and assessing curriculum. We see dropping test scores, dropping student success rates, lack of accountability for institutions like charter schools. The combination of not seeing any Democrats run and getting increasingly angry about what's happening in Texas was what prompted me to finally say, I'm going to do this. Let's do it.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of leads me into the next path about why the State Board of Education is matters and it's so important. Why is this office, the State Board of Education, so important for people to learn about and how it impacts them in their community?
It's hugely important. And I always chuckle a little bit when I say I'm running for State Board of Education and someone will attempt to correct me and say, oh, you mean school board? No, I don't mean school board. So there's 15 positions across the state. All of the districts are quite large. And it's the body responsible for implementing legislative changes that affect education. If you take a deep dive into what they do, and what I discovered in part of the research process for me is that this position and what the State Board of Education does touches many aspects of educational administration that I already do. I'll give you an example. I was having a discussion the other day about dual credit for high school students. Dual credit is amazing because it allows students to take college classes early to explore their interests, but it also saves them a lot of money. It's a great cost saving mechanism. However, there are some things that we need to do more research around. For example, I have a feeder school that requires their students to take dual credit environmental science. The only reason they require this is because their master's qualified teacher is eligible to teach at the dual credit level. So they're funneling all of their students into environmental science. Now, that doesn't sound necessarily like a bad thing, but what happens is you get some students that come out of that school that want to go into nursing. So they don't need environmental science, they need anatomy. Or they want to go into engineering, they don't need environmental science, they need physics. And because that student has already taken courses in environmental science, they now are further along in their degree plan for financial aid purposes and will be cut off sooner. And so a lot of people don't see the intricacies of all of the little domino pieces that are impacted when we make these state level decisions about should we offer dual credit? We say, seems like a great idea. It'll give students more opportunities. Yes, but we also have to be aware of these other potential issues that could impact students accessing their financial aid or having a negative impact on their GPA. I've also had a student coming out of high school that wanted to transfer to UT Austin, and she would have qualified for automatic admission, but based on her high school class rank, but because she had taken dual credit, her college GPA was lower, and she didn't qualify for automatic admission. The position I work in now touches many elements of what the State Board of Education already does. It makes a lot of sense, and I have a lot of unique insight into some of these issues.
I'm sure you were like, why wasn't I doing this before? And those are those little things that get clouded on purpose. They certainly aren't telling you those things. You have to go figure it out, or you're not going to know until it's too late. Why are they not helping with those issues? But if you don't have the right people, then they're not going to care about those things.
One of the first questions that I asked myself when I was thinking about running is, am I really qualified? Because, of course, I've got blind spots, I've got areas that I know less about in education. But then when I was going through and looking at so many of the different issues before the board, I'm like, yeah, if I'm not qualified, who is? Prompted me to take the leap and say, actually, I've got a lot of expertise that I can contribute to this.
And you brought up a good point about how people get confused between the school board versus the state board of education. Those are things that people just don't like. They assume it's the same thing. People don't want to be part of the school board, so they don't even think about state board of education. But we have so many teachers out there, so I wonder what prevents them from pursuing that, especially as Democrats.
This is anecdotal evidence from the past couple of months since I decided to run, which is that there are a lot of teachers out there that think, I don't know if I can do a full time job and run for a state office. And it's an office that is not full time, right? If elected, I would go to Austin 4 times a year, but it is challenging to have a family, a full time job, and run for office. The reason I'm not doing this interview in my office is because I have to be very careful about conflict of interest and using my workplace, which is public education institution, for things like this. But you'd be surprised too. It can take a lot of your time. And I think there are some teachers out there that I think would be interested, but they either are worried about that time aspect or they're having the same feeling I had, which is thinking about imposter syndrome. Even though I'm a teacher, maybe I'm a high school biology teacher, I don't know anything about special ed. Or I'm a special ed teacher, I don't know anything about educational technology. I'm an educational technology specialist, I don't know anything about calculus. So the reality is, you're not going to find one person that's an expert on everything. I come to this position with certain areas of expertise, and I will lean on other people in the areas that I don't have as much experience in.
You made some good points there. What's the pay scale? Like, it's not a full salary, right?
That's a great follow up question. It's unpaid. And I feel very privileged that I'm even on, but I had hard conversations with my wife about how much time and energy am I able to dedicate to the campaign and to fulfilling the position if I win. And also, right now, at least until the primaries, I'm running a fully self funded campaign. This is the ultimate teacher villain origin story. I'll mention too another reason why I decided to take the leap. I teach government here at the community college level. And I've seen the past 2 semesters that my students, we talk about news at the beginning of every class. I ask them for what's going on in the news? What are your opinions? What are your feelings about this? They have a discussion session to kick off class. The past 2 semesters, I've had a lot more students than normal coming in really frustrated to the point of tears and feeling hopeless. The one thing that I always tell them, because this is a freshman level core government classes. Okay, what are you going to do about it? Are you registered to vote? Are you signed up to support any campaigns? Are you? And of course, I'm very careful to present all of my information in a nonpartisan way.
Unbiased.
We talk about running for office. I think in a roundabout way, my students were also part of the inspiration for me running for office because this is something that we talk about in class. What are you going to do about it? I have not announced this in my workplace in any way, but I've had so many of my students find me on Instagram or in different ways, be like, "Oh my God, you're running for office! You're doing it! I saw that you're on the
Yep.
ballot."
You're like, I have to be about it. I can't just speak on it. I have to be about it too and be a role model for you guys and say, look, you can do it. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That leads me back to where we touched on earlier about why people who either don't have kids or maybe they're empty nesters, why people, whether you have kids or not, or you're just empty nesters, your kids are out of the system altogether, why should they still care?
I'll tell you a fun anecdote from one of my students that I had a couple years. I don't know if you're familiar with Blanson CTE High School that's close to Beltway 8 and North 45, but it's one of the feeder schools for where I work. I think that they've actually done an amazing job at incorporating a lot of career and technical education into the high school options that they have. They have a number of certificate programs. I had a student a couple years back who had graduated with her high school diploma, and in her last 2 years, she completed a phlebotomy certificate. The reason she did this is she said, I can go right now to Memorial Hermann or Houston Methodist and get a part time job as a phlebotomist while I go to nursing school. This is helping me pay for the next thing I'm doing. And it's giving me experience in patient care and stuff like that. And so when I meet people that say, why should I care about education because I don't have kids? That student is about to draw your blood.
These people coming out of the schools are going to be doing things for you.
She's about to be the one taking your blood. And in a few years, she's about to be your nurse, right? And you start to see it when you get older and you go to the doctors and you're like, oh my gosh, the doctor's half my age. But I want my nurse to have a solid education and to have gone to quality programs, right? I want to know that the programs that that student went to from a college level back to elementary met the educational standards we would expect. Healthcare is a really easy example because you don't want to imagine the student with the needle drawing your blood. But also, this is true for accounting. This is true for civil engineers that are going to be working on our roadways. There's so many things that all start with education, right? Do you want the civil engineer fixing I 45 to have gotten a D in their physics class? Probably not. Right? That's going to have a trickle on effect on how they work on the roadways and safety. Education is fundamental to preparing the next generation for the workforce. Whether it's welding or physical therapy, they need a solid education. For a discipline like nursing, we are having incredible nursing shortages. We have these really heated debates about things like immigration. And I am very much a believer that immigrants make our communities stronger. But also, part of the reason why we are bringing skilled immigrants into the US is because we don't have US graduates fulfilling those roles. If you look at this in the big picture and where our shortages are and where our blind spots are, this impacts all of us in everything we do. You should care because it's your tax dollars, but you should care because these students are going to be running our communities a few years. If so, you need to be invested in the next generation, regardless of how you are related to them, whether they're your kids, grandkids, godson or goddaughter, or just part of the community. What they know and what they come out of school with impacts all of us. Not such discipline specific things like engineering or nursing, but also just critical thinking skills and media literacy. These are essential to know right now, especially as we get into a world more and more dominated by AI and things like
Mhm.
that. We want to know that our youth, because we know also that sometimes the boomers can't tell what's AI. I need education on this, and that's a community responsibility.
Absolutely. One of the most frustrating things I hear is when our government is they downplay teachers and how much they should be paid, but I'm just like, how did you guys get to where you are? Even if it was private schools, teachers got you where you were. You learned things through educators, and yet you're not willing to give back to them. Exactly. So, moving on now to more of a focus on the district itself. We talked about how strange it's large and there's different dynamics to it. What would you say is unique about this district?
It's unique in that it's a mix of suburban and rural. What I've learned and I think about talking points and how to reach different audiences, I'm discovering that those suburban and rural voters, even though they have a lot of the same questions, a lot of the individual problems they're dealing with are unique to their district. So I'll give an example. I am firmly opposed to school vouchers. I think that school
Mhm.
vouchers take money away from the school or from the students and the districts that need it the most. I find a lot of voters in the suburban area of the district, Sugarland, Katy, Conroe, that type of area, are also opposed to school vouchers in principle. And when I went last week to do a visit in a more rural area in San Jacinto County, I thought, oh gosh, I don't know because I'm dealing with a slightly more involved crowd here. I don't know if they're going to that opposition to school vouchers, I feel. And one of them mentioned don't have any private schools in their area that are eligible for the school vouchers. And so they can't use the school vouchers, which is taking money away from students in a variety of ways, right? And so what that looks like in Katy might be different than what it looks like in Cold Spring. Something that's really interesting to think about, but I really like that dynamic of suburban and rural. And to be honest, I'm in the middle of it in Conroe because I'm right in the middle of the horseshoe. You talk about a place like Conroe or Montgomery County, depending on how you talk about it, it can either be like a northern suburb of Houston, way far out there in the
Yeah.
country. Like able to reach voters, different types of areas is something
Mhm.
really unique to this position. And to be honest, still something I'm figuring out how to do.
Such a big area. And my next question is in places you have been able to go so far, people that you've been able to talk to, what are some of those questions or concerns that they have?
There's definitely concerns over student readiness for college, career, and military after COVID.
Mhm.
Our test scores and our overall student success rates have, during the time of COVID, they have not made the recovery that we would expect them to make. So we're just now in the early days of seeing like how is that going to play out with these students that are bound for college, bound for the workforce, or bound for military. And I think that you mentioned the school vouchers can play out differently in suburban versus rural areas. But one issue that I think is wherever you are in the district is parents' concerns for their students graduating college, if that's in their plan, and finding meaningful work. A parent wants their child to be happy and gainfully employed. How do we get students to that when we see that students are graduating high school and coming to places like Lone Star College and testing into basic algebra, right? How do
Mhm.
we up to speed? I think that's something that everyone is concerned about. I think it's the point now where we have to really start talking about it because a couple of things happened recently. So, you know what's going on in Minnesota with ICE. I just open up the news every morning and I'm like, what is happening?
Just
I,
gets worse. Yeah.
that doesn't even feel like a strong enough word. I don't know, threatening crisis, but we
Right.
are targeting individuals in Texas. And one thing that really bothers me from an education point of view is ICE targeting parents in pickup lines. Um,
Mhm.
Something that I think needs to be addressed. I think that's something that people in our area are very concerned about. A lot of people don't even know that there's an immigration detention facility in Conroe in our community and they're all around. I understand that ICE have a role to do, but I do think that there are places and certain times that should be entirely off limits, right?
We know they're not doing what they set out to do. The
So,
manner in which they're going about it is they've
of
lost the plot. It's no longer what it's
course,
meant for. They're just doing what they want.
this impacts education is that we saw at the beginning of this academic students in Texas who are either undocumented or who have DACA status who are no longer eligible for in-state tuition at colleges and universities in the state. And so that's had a huge ripple effect on students dropping out of college, not continuing with college after high school, or having a lot more financial concerns and problems. That's something that I'm really in the thick of it where I work.
Yeah.
And you talk about these issues, I'm thinking of specific students in my head that I
Mhm.
know have had to drop out or who have had to take fewer classes, how they've been impacted by these changes. Honestly, the list is long. There's a lot of issues that people are really concerned about right now.
And so from that, you mentioned immigration. What are some other, like, if you had to say your top two or three priorities? Maybe immigration is included in there, but what would you say your top two or three priorities are for becoming a member of the State Board of Education?
Several committees in the State Board of Education. And what I would like to be on is the Curriculum and Instruction Committee. Curriculum is really my number one focus, my number one goal. And there's big things that are happening with curriculum right now that I am very concerned about. The first is the rewriting of our history books.
Mhm.
We know that there are subtle or not so subtle attempts to lessons and language around topics like slavery. I'm a firm believer that we need to learn history as it happened, good, bad, or ugly, through our history textbooks with rose colored glasses is going to do nothing but disservice our students. The first thing. The second thing is are seeing ideology creep into our curriculum. So contractors like ones that we're seeing now at the state level, again, rewriting the curriculum in a way that it's not just an issue with education, it's not just an issue with religion, it's an issue with prioritizing a specific religion. And so if we look at 10 commandments in the classroom, my very first question when I heard that news last year was, well, are teachers also allowed to put up the pillars of Islam? And if not, what are we doing? Church and state is like one of the most fundamental core constitutional principles that we have. A public school is the state. And so, like, absolutely, and I fully respect everyone's ability to individually worship as they choose. Great, fundamental. That's perfect. But it should not be in the classroom, and it should not be something that teachers are required to put up in a public space unless they are representing all religions, which they can't do. That would be impossible anyway. It's this focus on religious ideology creep into the classrooms and that it's a specific version, right? It's only this version of religious ideology. The third thing with curriculum is are focusing less and less on science. And our education system, especially as we get into the middle school and the high school levels, it needs to be science informed. It goes above and beyond just teaching things like evolution, also includes teaching things like comprehensive sex education, which is something that I support students' scientific critical thinking skills to be able to understand and digest information that they're getting, right? Semester, I'll have a student in my class that has some kind of a personal objection to vaccines. And we have this conversation. I say, okay, well, you feel that way. Show me your evidence. Show me your support. Show me the empirical articles that you found that have made you question a particular vaccine. Compare this with other evidence, right? This idea that we need to go back to science in the classroom and evidence based learning, something that I think we've gotten so far away from. My biggest goal is curriculum, specifically those three components of curriculum.
That's why we have private schools, so that
Yeah,
people can practice their religion in those schools. Now they're trying to bring it into public schools. You have your Catholic privates, your Baptist privates, or whatever, Methodist, whatever. You have different religions in those to choose from. So that was one thought. And then I had a thought when we were talking about college readiness and even beyond college readiness. Does the State Board of Education, are you guys connected to the STAR testing?
oh, that's such a great question. So the STAR testing has gone through a number of past 2 years. And so I'm just now catching up on what I guess you could call my official public stances on it. But I can't remember if I mentioned this to you before, but I actually used to grade for the Texas STAR exam. So I spent about 3 years. When I first moved to Texas, I did it as a side job and I graded seventh grade and 10th grade essays and short answer questions. And it was such a fascinating experience because it made me realize just how problematic standardized testing is. The grading rubric is really secretive and not shared publicly with parents in a lot of situations. But the particular test that I graded on a scale of 0 to 3. So a 0 was a non answer, and a 3 was essentially perfect. The majority of students got a 1 or a 2. If you compute those numbers, they aren't actually reflective of what the student was producing. We could just make this so much better by moving to a 10-point scale. It would give us so much more room for differentiation between the levels. But this 3-point scale is just ridiculous because it's forcing students into these categories that don't really represent their actual level of writing. My takeaway from that is look, standardized tests do have some value, they do have some place in our system, I think, but only a fraction of how we evaluate students. And it absolutely should not be tied to things like performance based funding because it's just not indicative of actual student work.
Right. What do you do around that topic? Do you have any decision making on that?
Yeah, so we do touch some elements of, for example, I made the connection to performance based funding, advocating for disentangling those two things, right? And we could look at the Houston ISD takeover as a classic case study of that, where we have
Hmm.
a school district of 250,000 students, and one school, based on their standardized test exams, got a failing grade, and we had the state come in and take over the entire district, which we're still getting the results from what I've seen. It's not been positive. It's been a shift in teaching methodology to a very more rote and impersonal style of assessment. And what we have is a lot of students, especially students with special needs or even students in gifted and talented programs that learn differently, are not vibing well with this methodology. We do have some say in the State Board of Education looking at how those different elements tie together and advocating for a more holistic assessment approach. And so I would want to know personally, not only how did the students fare on their standardized exams, but also what does their homework look like? What is their grade in that class? What is the teacher's evaluation? Of course, I work at the college level and I have some students that say, oh, this professor only does essays or this professor only does multiple choice, whatever their chosen style is. As a professor, I like to do a mix of different things because some of my students get really stressed out about essays. Some of my students
Hmm.
get stressed out about multiple choice because they have
Too many options.
or a 3 out of 4 chance of getting it wrong. And so just thinking about how can we look at all of our different students and find a fair and holistic way to evaluate them. One of the biggest things that we need to work on is teacher retention. There's no way to demoralize teachers faster than coming into their classrooms and saying, you're doing everything wrong. You're going to do it this way. And
And
we're
we're
going to
still not going to pay you enough. You're probably going to have to get a second job while you do this.
It's a great way to lose our qualified teachers to other districts or even other states.
Coming back to your campaign, what would you say to voters who assume an unopposed position or race means that they don't need to pay attention? You're the only Democrat. We'll just vote for you, whatever. What would you say about that?
Correction, I'm actually not unopposed. I
Oh,
have an opponent. His name is Shazeb Magani, and
okay.
I had the fortune of meeting him maybe 2 weeks ago. I couldn't find anything about him online. I've had other people say as well, is he still in the race? I couldn't find anything about him. He maybe joined the race for similar reasons as I did. He didn't see any Democrat on the ticket and decided to apply. I encourage you to reach out to him and talk to him. I think that he's a serious candidate. He is not really running in any meaningful
Yeah.
way.
Just putting his name out there.
More or less, I asked him when I had a chance to meet him, I said, what's your motivation for running? Why are you doing this? And he's maybe a handful of years out of high school himself. And he said, I am really opposed to school vouchers for this reason and that reason. And I said, actually, that sounds like a lot of what I believe as well. The one distinction that I'll make in the two of us, and he's a fantastic guy. Again, I encourage you to reach out to him. Other than personal experience, he doesn't have any working experience in education. And
Okay.
so, out of a personal interest and a passion, I am the only Democratic candidate with education experience.
So let's talk about some voter engagement. What's one thing you wish more voters understood about this office, the State Board of Education?
Ooh,
There's so many.
we've talked about how it impacts all of us, regardless of whether or not you have kids in school. When I get into discussions on things like financial aid, what I find is a lot of my friends who don't have kids, they're like, oh, I was impacted by that, or I was impacted by the Texas Star exam, or I was impacted by my school getting less funding. And so all of us, either through our kids or through our community members, or even us personally, if you're young enough, like we've been affected by some of these changes that are happening. The biggest thing for me when I think of voter outreach is just getting people to show up to the polls, period. And while you're there, please vote for me, but also please.
Yeah. First, just show up and leave your house. No excuses.
Yeah, exactly.
Democrats.
Semester, I show my government students this is the percentage of voter turnout by age range, and they're embarrassed by their age range because most of them are in this 18 to 25 age range. And I'm like, do something about it. I tell my students and everybody I know, it's so simple these days to educate yourself. If you're going to League of Women Voters, vote for one, right? I go every election, even the local elections, the runoffs, the proposition, everything. And I go to vote 411 and I answer some questions about what I think, and it prints out a thing that says, this is your voting checklist. It's so easy. Even if you're thinking, I don't really know who to vote city council or what does the railroad commissioner even do?
They literally have Siri and Alexa at the palm of their hand. Siri,
Exactly.
how do I vote? Where do I vote? It's such easy access now. But I'm willing to walk you through it, but you have to ask questions and it's accessible to them.
Especially for positions like this and positions that are localized, you might have in any given election a few thousand or a few hundred votes that make the difference. That's such a small margin that your vote doesn't count. I can understand why people feel that way with the presidential election, even though I don't agree.
Mhm.
But at the
Right.
local level, that's not the case.
That is what they want you to feel. And that's what I say too. I said that's exactly what they want you to feel. So it's okay that you feel that way, but you still need to vote because you never know what that's going to do. And that is your power.
The past few elections I've voted in, I normally do early voting, and it's not unusual when I show up to vote that I am the youngest person in the room, and I'm 40. So telling my students that, I say, if you show up and you don't see anyone else in your age range, then the people voting on these issues that impact you are the age of your grandparents, having a say in it, right? You need
Mhm.
your voice out there as well because these issues may impact you in a different way that they impact them.
Mhm.
I don't want my 80-year-old grandparent voting for something that might affect my reproductive choices, right? Because we have different perspectives and ideologies. And so the only way that I can think about changing that is to show up.
And reminding them that they are the younger generation is the future. To end, my last question for you is just is there anything that we didn't cover that you would want anyone to know?
Honestly, I think that for me, this district, and again, I encourage anyone to go out there and just Google Texas State Board of Education District 8. This district is such a fast changing district because it covers so much of Houston's suburbia. And so it's rapidly growing. It's one of the fastest growing districts in the state. Just because it has historically been held by a Republican or is seen somehow as more Republican leaning district does not mean that it's not flippable. And so, the risk of sounding cliche, I took the leap to put my name on that ballot application. And I said, you know what? We're going to do it. And now I need people to take the leap and vote for me and support me. I need people to follow me on social media. I had an interview last Wednesday with the LGBTQ Victory Fund. And they told me that after the primary, I can apply for funding, but my funding is directly related to how many social media followers I have. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
We're gonna get started.
all of these little things, like this district is flippable. And this, I wouldn't be running, to be perfectly honest, if I thought that I was just destined to lose. That is not the case in this situation because it's a fast growing area with young people and young families. It's more multicultural than it's ever been before. We just need to get people out to vote.
So thank you so much. I appreciate you. This has been so fun, inspiring, and educational in so many ways.
Appreciate all the help and literally anything that you can do, even if it's on social media. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Have a good one.
Bye.